Architecture of Power. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Power, from the genesis of control to the instability of origin. Power is not born from the desire to crush, but from a caught breath. It is not, at its origin, an act of aggression, but a stabilizing reaction. Imagine the human consciousness as an open space, struck by violent winds, the perception of loss, of death, and of time that never returns. This is fundamental fragility. In the core of your consciousness, there is a tension that cannot be eliminated, only reorganized. It is that structural dread that precedes any interpretation, the fear of discontinuity and the irreversible. From this exposure to the void emerges the impulse to build form. Power thus becomes a conversion technology. It takes your diffuse fear and freezes it into predictable structures, transforming instability into operable order. It does not heal vulnerability. It redistributes it into a system capable of tolerating it without collapsing. Power is the spontaneous organization of a tension field desperately seeking equilibrium. Yet here, at the very foundation, the first structural anomaly appears. Was power born to protect our weakness, or is weakness merely the way our mind justifies a much older need to organize everything around us? This uncertainty is not an analytical error, but the first structural crack in the foundation of our entire world. Control is not a solid block of stone, but a stratification of successive densities that envelop our existence. The first density is coercive control. It is brute force, the punishment you can touch with your hand, the raw visibility of the sanction. It relies on the immediate exposure of the consequence and produces order through massive energy consumption. It is stable but inefficient in the long run, as it requires continuous surveillance. And yet, a mystery arises. Why do we sometimes obey even when the threat vanishes? Is it a fear we swallowed until it became us? Or is it a latent structure, a legacy of submission written in our blood? Then we enter the denser layer of symbolic control. Here, power ceases to strike the body and begins to sculpt perception. Norms, language, hierarchies of prestige, and collective narratives become invisible infrastructures of direction. The explicit command disappears because the direction is already internalized. You are no longer told what to do. You have come to assume that your choice is already aligned with an external order that you can no longer distinguish from yourself. Here, the supreme paradox operates. The more invisible control becomes, the more total it is. And when invisibility is complete, spontaneous misalignments can occur. Chaos without an identifiable cause. Finally, we reach the core, inner sovereignty. It is the promise of the absolute autonomy of the psychic system, that state where no one can influence or reorganize you from the outside without your internal consent. It seems to be the ultimate freedom, a stability that does not depend on validation or belonging. But here too lies a major anomaly, the subtle dependence on one's own autonomy. The more master of oneself the system becomes, the more sensitive it becomes to the loss of this state. Your autonomy becomes your new prison, a loop that cannot be resolved without a loss of structure. This is the central paradox of power. It seems to operate by a simple rule. It transforms instability into stability. However, this rule produces a cynical reversal. Excessive stability always generates a higher-order instability. Coercive rigidity becomes brittle fragility. Symbolic influence becomes perceptive alienation. Inner sovereignty becomes fragile isolation. The paradox is never resolved. It only migrates deeper into the fabric of our being. All these concepts require an empirical anchoring, a point of contact with the ground. Theory is worthless if it cannot be found in the resistance of reality. Instantiation is not a mere exemplification, but the point of contact between the model and the living phenomenon, which always remains richer than its description. To prevent the system from closing in on itself, we must link it to the layers of reality, the historical layer of macro-social transformations, the institutional layer of functional structures of control, and the micro-relational layer, where the asymmetry of power becomes directly observable in a single glance or interaction. These pieces of reality are the resistances that prevent the architecture of power from becoming a closed conceptual system. They force the theory to remain partially exposed, vulnerable to that which can never be fully formalized. Power is not just about the one who leads, but about that which persists in silence, between us and within us. This is the anatomy of power, a construction built on a foundation of fear, maintained by invisible symbols, and finalized in a sovereignty that isolates us. The analysis has only just begun.